So I think we're just about ready to get started. So thank you guys all for joining in today. My name is Dalton Goolsby. I'm the supervisor of the Urban Horticulture Program. I know everyone's probably having a busy week, and I know we're especially busy here with all these Earth Month events, like I mentioned earlier. But thank you guys for taking some time out of your schedules to sit down and learn about my favorite recommendations for Florida flowering trees, especially for South Florida. Obviously, there are tons and tons of recommendations I could make. This is going to be sort of a condensed version of our In Your Backyard series webinars, so we won't have time to get to all of them today. Just a few that I would like to highlight. But if you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to provide a slew of awesome resources as well at the end for you guys to do your own research, whether you're planning on installing a tree in your own yard, or maybe you just want to have some recommendations for the future. This will be a useful presentation for you. I originally developed this for the Tropical Flowering Tree Society of South Florida. Did a presentation for them a few years ago, actually. So it's been a while since I've done this presentation, but all the information here is obviously still very relevant, if not even more so, being Earth Month, Earth Week, even as Earth Day was actually just yesterday. So thank you guys again for joining, and let's go ahead and jump on in. Cool. So this is all based on Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, which is basically this is my contractually obligated statement. I always like to say it's the state of Florida's premier extension program, which promotes sustainable alternatives to the conventional style of the kind of cut, mow, and blow landscaping that we see running rampant all over Miami-Dade County and the rest of Florida. This program essentially provides guidance on low impact, environmentally friendly, and science-based landscape practices that use less water and reduce pollutant loading to Florida waters. So a lot of the trees we're going to be looking at today are Florida native, or at least Florida friendly. They're extremely low maintenance, and really after they get established, they won't need any, additional inputs of water or fertilizer, or won't need much care outside of what good old Mother Nature will give to them, which is why I always recommend for our Florida native plants. I'm always vouching for them. And not to mention our Florida native pollinators, things like butterflies, bees, birds, things of that nature, have all evolved alongside our Florida native plants for, hundreds of thousands of years without human interference. So obviously, these are the things that are best suited to grow and provide for the native wildlife in our areas. So, being Earth Month, it's important to keep our critter friends in mind, as well as the green aspects of our world, the plants and things like that. So the critters are important as well. So planting these trees, maintaining these trees in your landscapes will ultimately provide for them and be very beautiful and low maintenance to you. So it's really a win-win. And as you can see, reduce pollutant loading to our Florida waters. All these plants and trees that I'm about to recommend aren't going to need a lot of fertilizer unless you maybe want to boost their bloom a little bit. And using less fertilizer, especially during our rainy season, which you really shouldn't be doing that during our rainy season anyway. Reducing the amount of fertilizer you're inputting into our yard reduces the amount of fertilizer polluted runoff, which ends up in our drains, washing out into the bay and causing harmful things such as algal blooms, fish kills, all those nasty, environmental disasters that we want to try and avoid. And Florida friendly landscaping is a great way to do that. I just want to quickly highlight our 9 principles and just touch on some of them real quick, because they do apply to this presentation as well, especially our number 1 principle, which I kind of refer to as our cornerstone principle, which is planting the right plant in the right place in your landscape. And doing this, based on the plant's sunlight needs, water needs, maybe grouping them around plants with similar needs in relation to their own, will reduce the amount of input and work you have to put into maintaining a beautiful landscape, right? If you have drought-loving plants like maybe agaves or cacti, things like that, and they're being watered on the same zone as your turf, which needs a lot of water, then obviously 1 or 2 of those plants are going to, ultimately suffer. Either the cacti are going to be getting overwatered, or the grass is going to be getting underwatered. So all these kinds of things kind of go into maintaining a Florida-friendly landscape. Obviously, watering efficiently, fertilizing appropriately, those are 2 things that are going to be accomplished by installing Florida native plants. They're going to reduce the need for those 2 things drastically. Mulching is extremely important, helps retain moisture. That mulch is also going to decompose and add nutrients back to the soil that the plant is taking up. So you can think of it almost as a natural fertilizer, almost natural compost is that mulch. These trees are going to attract a lot of wildlife. We're going to be highlighting all the wildlife for these specific trees in my presentation today. You're going to be managing those yard pests responsibly. Well, hopefully the idea is by installing natives, you won't have to worry too much about yard pests, but there are some obviously native, non-native pests that like to prey on our native plants as well. So these are all things you might encounter. Luckily here at the Extension Office, we do offer pest identification services, disease identification services. Admittedly, our disease ID services are a little underfunded, but we can help you point out issues in your landscape, such as fungal issues we can diagnose here and things of that nature. For the big stuff like viral infections and things like that, you probably need to take it to Trek, which is right around the corner, but we could always instruct you how to do so. Or maybe we do have the means to identify the pest or disease in your landscape, and we can do it for free here at our office. So I always say use your resources that are available to you. So our pest and disease ID services are usually free, and they're a great way to know what the issue is before you go act. We're going to be recycling yard waste. A great way to do that is by mulching, composting, reducing stormwater runoff, which we already kind of touched on, and protecting the waterfront, which won't have too much of a impact here on this presentation unless maybe you live near a waterfront, which I did provide a couple nice coastal, if you live more near the coast, a couple nice coastal selections as well for those coastal thickets and things like that. All right, and just touching again on our cornerstone principle, because I do believe a lot of the other principles kind of fall into line. If you're selecting the right plant for the right place, you're going to be managing less pests. You're going to need to water less. All these things kind of fall in line if you're abiding by this number one principle. And that includes knowing things such as the light availability, the moisture availability of the site. And one thing I always point out, especially when we're talking about trees, this is extremely important, is to always consider the mature size of a plant before you plant it in the ground. And the example I give is live oak, a great, great, great tree. Actually, we're going to highlight it here in the presentation today. But if you don't have ample room in your landscape for a live oak, then it can really become a hazard to your house, especially living in South Florida. Those live oaks can get pretty long and laggy, and then we got hanging branches over your roof. We got the roots going up into the foundation of your home, and these things can cause issues, right? You're going to have to be cutting back the limbs on the tree, or you might have to eventually remove the tree, which will not only cost you money, but in the case of continually cutting limbs off of the tree, you're opening up wounds on the tree that can let in things like rot, stress the tree out, which invites pests and diseases to eventually kill the tree. So if you're considering the mature size of that tree, right, just like when we get a cut, we have to put a Band-Aid and Neosporin on it so it doesn't get infected. The same kind of thing happens with trees. We don't want to be opening up those wounds for infection to get in. So considering the mature size of the tree will help set you up for success long term. All right. So when I'm mentioning the best flowering trees in South Florida, I've got my mind on the pollinators, of course, because pollinators need our help and they feed us, right? Right now, due to climate change, habitat fragmentation and degradation, and people just installing the wrong things, really, and also implying that pesticide improperly, right? We're undergoing what's been deemed a pollinator apocalypse, and basically, right now, what we're seeing is invertebrate pollinator species, which are pollinators without vertebrae, meaning no backbone. These are things like bees and butterflies. These invertebrate pollinator extinction rates are about 100 to 1,000 times higher than average right now due to human impact. And about 40% of those are bee and butterfly species, which are currently facing extinction. So you can kind of see the breakdown here of imperiled invertebrate pollinators. Of those species, about 27% are listed as least concern, 40% are declining, and 33% of those endangered. And like I said, this presentation was made a few years ago, so I almost guarantee you that those numbers have changed. This is a cool little slide. I stole this slide from Barbara. It's our South Florida butterflies, and these are our 4 endangered butterflies. And I actually am not up to date with the most recent research on the Miami Blue. Maybe Barbara can chime in because she is part of the Miami Blue chapter. But last I heard, I do believe wild populations of the Miami blue are basically all but kaput. We've also got our other three, or the rest of our three endangered butterflies, rather, sorry, the Bartram scrub hairstreak and Florida leafwing, which both like to live out in our Florida Everglades, which are also shrinking right now. And we've also got the Schaus's swallowtail, which is a beautiful swallowtail, which kind of lives towards the coast. So these are our four imperiled butterflies, but as you can see in South Florida, far more species are imperiled or listed as species of concern. So, planting our natives, like I previously said, will help offset these declining numbers. And as you'll see, some of the host plants for some of these butterflies are actually trees, native trees. All right. So why is planting for pollinators important? Well, pollinators literally feed us. About more than half of our global diet of fats and oils comes from an animal pollinated plant, meaning it's open pollinated. And pollinators also facilitate the reproduction in over 90% of the world's flowering plants. So without butterflies and bees and other pollinators, we really won't have much to eat. This is a little success story I always like to include whenever I'm talking about South Florida pollinators, which is the Atala hairstreak. And this butterfly, back in the 70s, when Congress was passing the Endangered Species Act, the Atala hairstreak was actually believed to be extinct. So Congress didn't want to bother with, protecting an extinct species. So the species was not even included on the endangered species list. Well, fast forward a few months, and I don't know if you can see my photo here, but I've got a book by an awesome gentleman named Roger Hammer here, and a lot of the information from this talk is actually gotten from this book, which Barbara bought for me, Attracting Hummingbirds and Butterflies in Tropical Florida. So Roger Hammer is a famous naturalist here in South Florida, and he was doing some research out in Virginia Key and discovered the Atala hairstreak was not only still existing, but he also found its host plant, the plant that butterfly wants to lay its eggs on. A lot of people don't know that butterflies have very specific plants they want to lay their eggs on. They won't just go laying their eggs on any plant. And these plants can vary from species to species. Some of you may have heard that monarchs like to lay eggs on milkweed. Well, the same applies for other butterflies. For instance, the Atala likes to lay their eggs on Zamia species, our native Zamia species being something called Kunti palm. So Mr. Hammer discovered this Atala, a colony of eggs and butterflies on the Kunti. And, fast forward a few years later, people start landscaping with this Kunti palm all over the county. And now this butterfly that was once thought to be extinct, because people have planted its host plant so profusely, is not even listed as a butterfly of concern anymore. They have completely rebounded. So my hope is that we can do the same for the rest of our endangered and imperiled butterfly species here in South Florida. And the way we do that is by planting trees, shrubs, and flowers, right, that our butterflies have evolved alongside, that they need to get nectar and lay their eggs. So there's a misconception that flowers are really all butterflies need, but this is a cool presentation because it actually opens people's minds that some of these butterflies actually need species of trees and large or small shrubs to lay their eggs. It's not all just flowers, right? So selecting native trees is an important aspect to building a butterfly garden, or really just a Florida native, Florida friendly garden. These are some of my favorite recommendations, as I've said. And like I mentioned earlier, there are tons of other options out there. So if you don't see one if I didn't mention your favorite, feel free to drop it in the chat, or ask a question about it later, and we can touch on it at the end of the presentation. But the first one I want to highlight is one of my very most favorite trees. We got a few of them here in the landscape, and there are two varieties of this tree. One of them kind of has a more upright growth pattern, where another one has more of a weeping growth pattern. I really like the weeping ones. I grew up with weeping willow in my landscape up in North Florida, so I love the weeping aspect. This is an awesome smaller tree known as Bahamas strongbark. Borea succulenta is the scientific name there. This is really a one-stop shop, I like to say, for our pollinators. All kinds of butterflies are going to be coming to the flowers for the nectar. The birds and other native wildlife love those red berries that you see there on the tree. So it's a little berry factory as well. And if you're a big hummingbird fan, we had a master gardener graduation at a master gardener's house here in the Redlands, and he had a few of these trees in his landscape. And I was just watching the ruby-throated hummingbirds jumping from flower to flower in this tree the whole time we were there. So It gets bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies. So as far as I'm concerned, and birds. So that's a 4 for 4. This is a perfect tree. A very small tree as well. So you could kind of maintain this, as a smaller tree in your landscape, and it will, be providing for all the wildlife. There's not really any butterflies that will lay their eggs on this tree, but it's such a great source of nectar and food that it has to make my list, in my opinion. And honestly, if I could only have 2 or 3 species of trees in my yard, I would probably pick this one, not just because I think it's a beautiful tree, but like I said, for all the ecological benefits it provides. All right, here's another great one. This is actually in the citrus family, which is why you see this giant swallowtail here at the bottom right of your screen. This is a beautiful butterfly. It's actually the largest butterfly species in the state of Florida, and they like to lay their eggs on species of citrus plants. These butterflies have a very odd-looking caterpillar. I call it the bird poop caterpillar because it likes to blend in on the tree by looking like a piece of bird poop. So if you have a lime, lemon, grapefruit. I see them a lot on grapefruit, interestingly. Any kind of citrus tree in your yard, and you see a moving piece of bird poop munching on your leaves, don't rip it off because it's going to turn into this big, beautiful butterfly. Um, and I like to recommend non-citrus producing citrus trees because a lot of the times these animals can actually be called orange dogs historically because they used to get into orange groves and cause a lot of damage. But if you've got a non-citrus producing citrus family tree, you can move the caterpillar onto those trees and you won't tear up your citrus. So things like Hercules Club is a great option, as well as Biscayne prickly ash. And I don't know if you guys noticed the habitat listed, the preferred habitat for these two trees, coastal hammock and thicket. So if you live close to the coast, these guys have a high salt tolerance, high drought tolerance. They are great choices for a citrus tree out near the coast. Biscayne Bay prickly ash is another one of my favorites. And if you don't like either of those two and you don't mind a few thorns, probably my favorite of these three options is wild lime. I didn't include this in the presentation today because it can get a little unruly. The prickles can get a little mean, but I think that tree is absolutely beautiful. The Biscayne prickly ash I would consider it a small to medium tree. Doesn't get too large, and it can actually be maintained as even a shrub if you wish. But like I said, this one has a extremely high drought tolerance, and really you put it in the ground, and once it gets established, you won't have to worry about it too much. And it will be a host for those giant swallowtail butterflies, the bird poop caterpillars, as I call them once again. And they produce a beautiful, fragrant flower, as do many of the citrus family plants. And yeah, the flower is great for nectar as well as a larval host for our giant swallowtail. So it's a great option. All right. This one you might have a little trouble getting to grow, but I just love this plant. Where I come from in Central Florida, we get the grandifolia magnolia. This one's Magnolia virginiana, a sweet bay magnolia. It's a much smaller tree, typically about 10 to 30 feet high in South Florida. I know that I always mix up Derm and RER, but one of those two groups is restoring not Castello hammock, the Matheson's hammock, I want to say, up on Old Cutler near the old Girl Scout camp there, and basically right across the street from Fairchild. And they're installing a bunch of these sweet bay magnolias, a bunch of our wild limes, and this beautiful butterfly, the tiger swallowtail, the eastern tiger swallowtail, will lay its eggs on this beautiful sweet bay magnolia. It kind of prefers a more swampy habitat, so poorly drained soil. So maybe if you have a spot in your yard that doesn't get a lot of sun and kind of puddles up in a heavy rain event, this may be a good choice to maybe try and soak up some of that excess water in your landscape. These trees can tolerate a little bit of that. And Barbara, when I first got here, me and Barbara were always talking about the eastern tiger swallowtail because they are absolutely beautiful, beautiful butterflies. And we haven't been seeing much of them here in South Florida. Our buddy James Duncan, who's been restoring the Matheson hammock, has actually been saying that since they've been planting this tree, they've been seeing them return to the area slowly. So I don't know I don't know what my audience is today, but if we have any Pokemon fans, this is a fun fact for the kiddos. The eastern tiger swallowtail caterpillar gave them the inspiration for a Pokemon called Caterpie. So if you're curious about what that looks like, go ahead and look up the tiger swallowtail caterpillar. Something that's fun, just this doesn't have pertain much to the tree, but something that is very fun about the tiger swallowtail is you can sometimes tell the female apart from the male very easily because there's actually a dark form female. And I believe I want to say that that is the dark form female in this photo. Like I said, it's been a while since I made the presentation. I don't see this butterfly often, but the female can also appear as the lighter form that you see on the bottom, that gives the tiger swallowtail its name with the orangey yellow and black stripes. But they can also take on the form of the dark form female, which will be a beautiful darker butterfly. They look like different species, but they're actually the same. It's just a female. So a fun little fact there. All right, this is an absolutely beautiful tree. You can see the inflorescence there on the left side. Just stunning inflorescence. The Mexican Albarradoa, which is another shorter tree, gets a little taller here in South Florida, and it likes those really rocky, low, very low soil, right? Like kind of like those Rockland hammock edges, right? So it doesn't need a lot of high organic content soil to grow. Doesn't need a lot of that soil either. So if you have a very, if you have one of those landscapes where you go out and stick your shovel in the ground and it only gets about 3 inches down before you're hitting rock, this might be a good choice of tree for you here because they do well in those kinds of environments. And it is a larval host for this beautiful little Dina butterfly, the Eurema Dina. And yeah, just a really fun plant. They're not super fragrant, but they, like I said, the inflorescence is absolutely stunning. And a fun fact about this tree, they actually produce male and female trees. So if you want to get it pollinated, you'll probably need a male and a female. And they've done research, and it's most likely wind pollinated. Just a fun little fact there. All right. This is another one of my favorite trees, another one that we've got here in the landscape at the extension office. This is something called Lignum vitae. I encourage everyone to go check out Lignum vitae State Park. Absolutely beautiful. You'll see some absolutely ancient Lignum vitae there. A lot of the Lignum vitaes we see in our landscapes today are probably under 50 or 100 years old. This is an extremely slow growing tree. So it's going to take a while to grow up, and it'll give off the the beautiful purplish blue flowers, even when it's small. But if you want it to, kind of be a specimen tree, it's going to take quite some time to get to that point. But it is a great option for nectar and also food for the birds. The birds love this guy. And fun fact, it also is a host plant for our lyside sulfur, which is this kind of lime green colored butterfly you see in the bottom right corner. A lot of those sulfurs kind of have often a yellowish tint to them because they exhibit a behavior known as mud puddling, where they'll actually they nectar on flowers as well, but sometimes they'll land on a puddle of mud and actually be sucking some of those nutrients out of the mud. And one of those nutrients they're looking for is sulfur, which gives them their name and that characteristic yellow color. So catbirds and mockingbirds eat the seeds of this tree. If you don't know what a catbird is, it's a relative to the mockingbird, and they probably have the cutest personality of any bird I know in Florida, besides maybe the mockingbird. Like I said, they are relatives, so they're both very fun birds. I'm sure you've probably seen them floating around your landscape at one point in time, and both of those guys love the lignum. All right. Obviously, if you've got a seaside property, you might already have some of these trees in your landscape, but I just like to include them because they are extremely important. It's what we call a cornerstone species for our estuaries, our coastal areas, because they reduce storm surge and they also provide a huge habitat for all kinds of wildlife, fish, birds to rook in, and even certain species of moths and butterflies, as you see here. The one at the bottom picture that's kind of iridescent blue color, that's our mangrove skipper. If you've ever been out on the Chapman Field kayak launch, you may have seen some of these guys flitting through the mangroves. I really like that trail because the mangroves are kind of looming over your head with the sunbeams coming in through the leaves. And these butterflies will appear just like they'll look like a moth flying through the air, really. They'll be dark and brown or black looking. But when they fly through one of those little beams of sun, you'll see them light up with that iridescent blue. And they actually have a white face. You can't really see it from the photo, but they do have a white face, which is absolutely beautiful and characteristic of that skipper. So skippers are kind of the in-between the cousins to butterflies and moths. The thing that separates them from a moth, which right above the mangrove skipper there, you see the Io moth. If you've ever touched an Io moth caterpillar, you probably don't like these guys very much. They will sting the ever living heck out of you. My girlfriend had a run in with one just a couple of years ago, and she was out of commission for a couple days with a really messed up hand because it shot spikes off into her hand. But the moth is, and even really the caterpillar, in my opinion, is absolutely stunning. What separates a skipper from a moth is you can see the antenna here on a moth are feathered, whereas a skipper's antenna are clubbed or hooked. And also, moths exhibit diurnal activity, meaning they're active during the day, whereas moths exhibit nocturnal activity, meaning they're active at night. Moths are also a little bit more evolutionarily advanced, which is why many times their caterpillars will sting you because it's an evolved defense mechanism. Just some fun stuff, fun little facts there about some of these species that call our mangroves home. And obviously, as I mentioned, these trees are far more than just a spot for our butterflies to lay their eggs and something to prevent the storm surges from getting up on land. We have many other species of mangroves that can grow in Florida as well, including the black mangrove. There you can see the Lyside sulfurs, that's the Strateris sulfur, and they are doing that mud puddling habit I told you about earlier. And this is another fun butterfly called the mangrove buckeye in the bottom. The buckeyes, family of butterflies, is a really beautiful family that has these. They're characterized by these mini eye spots and these really complex patterns. The mangrove buckeye will be laying their eggs on the black mangrove. So fun trees. I know mangroves probably aren't what you guys are thinking of when you're thinking of planting trees in your landscape, but if you've got the habitat for them, they're absolutely amazing trees. All right, now we're going to get into a few larger trees that I recommend for the South Florida. But like I said in the beginning of my presentation, if you're thinking about installing a larger tree, or really any tree or shrub in general, always consider the mature size of that tree because it's going to reduce the amount of maintenance it takes to keep that tree up off the foundation of your home, up off your roof, things like that, and will set the tree up for success long term, right? Less stress and things like that by hacking off limbs or what have you. All right, and this is probably my absolute favorite tree for South Florida. You can see this tree landscaped in library parking lots. I see it all the time, probably mostly in school parking lots all over the county. It is a great shade tree, and we did have a huge one in our landscape, which we unfortunately had to cut for to clear space for our expanded nursery, which I'm very sad about. But if you could have one tree, I mentioned earlier the Bahama Strongbark, I would have that tree in my landscape if I could have maybe only 2 or 3 species of tree. Well, if I could only have one tree in my yard, this would probably be it. Because as you guys see in the ecology section down below, not only does it provide significant food and cover for wildlife, it's a great habitat for tree snails, and it's a host plant for at least 3 different kinds of butterflies. The Cassius blue, which is that beautiful grayish black butterfly in the bottom left there. It's got those, and I'm a gator, so it's got any butterfly with orange and blue on it's a winner for me in my book. They've got those blue and orange capped eye spots on the back hind wing. You've got the mimosa yellow, which is the one just above that, the tiny little yellow butterfly. They will also lay their eggs on my favorite ground cover for South Florida, which is sunshine mimosa. I've got a little colony of them in my sunshine mimosa in my butterfly garden here at work. But they will also lay their eggs in that false tamarind tree as well. And then we've also got the large orange sulfur, which is a yellowish, not very large, but as far as the sulfurs are concerned, this is a larger butterfly, kind of orange and yellow dappled butterfly there, kind of with a tawny pattern that you see in the bottom right. So great selection for South Florida. It's an awesome shade tree. I love the way Barbara explains them. She says, if the sun's setting behind this tree, you'll just see a flurry of pollinators up in the tree, doing their work. So all kinds of things will visit this tree. Birds nesting in it, butterflies, things for the nectar. So it's just truly a great option for South Florida. And they're absolutely beautiful. I love the little balls in fluorescence. All right, another great option if you live in the Gables area. We have no shortage of these guys, and they are. I like the host options for this plant. You can see the three that I highlighted: the Pluto Sphinx moth, which is this crazy looking moth up here in the Sphinx moth family. You may be familiar with another moth in the Sphinx moth family, which is they lay the eggs for the tomato hornworm. So if you ever had a tomato or tobacco plant in your yard, you've seen that worm with the horn coming off its back. That's in the family of sphinx moths. So all those caterpillars have that same kind of little horn coming off their back that's characteristic of the sphinx moth family. We've got the Edwards wasp, which is that little tiny guy in the bottom right corner that looks almost like a love bug, which is an interesting little moth. Or sorry, a wasp, not a moth. And the ruddy daggerwing is an absolutely beautiful orange and black butterfly here that you see in the bottom left. They kind of have an irregular dagger-shaped pattern to their wings. That's in the family of butterflies called the wings, which is pretty appropriate for this guy. Something that's fun about him is when he lifts his wings up, he has this cream-colored underside, which is just absolutely stunning. And the caterpillar for the ruddy daggerwing looks like an alien. They're one of the most pretty caterpillars and terrifying looking caterpillars I think I've ever seen. We've got a shortleaf fig, and this is our Florida native fig, by the way. It doesn't make an edible fig for us, but the birds sure will love it. That is definite. Um, in our migratory season, I've got a shortleaf fig in my backyard in the Gables, a huge one. It actually goes into my neighbor's yard as well, and I count all different kinds of species of migratory birds up there in our migratory bird season. Things like the black and white warblers. I'm spacing the name on the black and orange one I sometimes see up there as well. Really pretty. I see the buntings up in those trees, female and male, painted and indigo buntings. So it's a great option for South Florida as well. If you have the space, I will mention. All right. Jamaican dogwood. This is another great one. It gets a little larger in South Florida, so just be aware of that. And it does grow pretty fast, but this will be pretty tolerant of a lot of our soils here in South Florida, a lot of our environments. I assume many of you guys could probably grow this tree in your yard with little issue. And it is another great host plant for a lot of our native butterflies. The Cassius blue again, our hammock skipper, which you see above our Cassius blue there. Another one that kind of looks like a moth because he's in the skipper family, right? And there's another butterfly, the fulvous hair streak, which also he's introduced to Florida, which you see him in the bottom right corner. The hair streaks are these tiny little butterflies, beautiful, but they don't really let you get close. So you kind of need a pair of binoculars or maybe a camera to get up close and really observe those guys. The Atala hair streak actually is in the hair streak family, but they're not as erratic as the rest of the hair streaks in that family. So the fulvous hair streak, I recommend planting the Jamaican dogwood because the fulvous hair streak has another host plant in South Florida that's very problematic. The Jamaican dogwood, not so much. If you've ever heard of Brazilian pepper, this little guy here likes to lay his eggs on the Brazilian pepper tree as well. So we've introduced him to Florida. He's not a native, but he can be a friendly butterfly. So we want to still provide for him as well, even though he's not a native. And we don't want to provide for him with the extremely invasive Brazilian pepper. So we can provide for him with a Jamaican dogwood instead. I recently took a trip up to North Florida along I-95, and I mean, I feel like basically the whole way up, you're just passing Brazilian pepper trees littering the side of the road. So it's a huge problem, that Brazilian pepper. Unfortunately, the birds and our wildlife love those little berries, which is why it's spread so profusely all over South Florida. So if we're providing other native plants that provide berries, like our shortleaf fig, the Bahama strongbark, the lignum vitae, or maybe even something like firebush. If you don't have room for a tree, firebush produces an edible berry. All these things can provide food and berries for our local wildlife that's not going to offset native plants like the Brazilian pepper is currently doing. All right. And we're getting to our big hitter now. This is our live oak, Quercus virginiana. And obviously, these are huge trees. They get much larger, and I think they have a prettier growth habit where I'm from, where they kind of bloom down. But I just love these trees. They actually do produce an inflorescence, which a lot of people don't realize. The oak trees have an inflorescence that is grown on them. But a lot of people call these trees the tree of life because you can see in the wildlife and ecology section just the plethora of animals, and these are just the ones that I've highlighted. I mean, the entry in a lot of the books you'll read is usually like a page or and a half long of all the things that interact with this tree. And I'm a huge eastern gray squirrel fan, and obviously squirrels love live oaks. So I got to have a live oak in my yard when I get older. Um, I grew up in Central Florida, where, like I said, these things grew profusely. Actually, my family had a an old pecan farm. Didn't really produce much after I was born, maybe for a few years. I remember having my great grandma's pecan pie a few times before she died and our tree stopped producing. But uh, we actually had a family of white eastern gray squirrels. They weren't albino. They had something called leucism, which is kind of like a loss of pigment and loss of color in their hair. So we had some. They looked albino, but they're not albino. They're white squirrels running around our live oaks back at my dad's house when I was growing up. So that's a fun memory I have. Oh, and also barred owls. My dad saved a barred owl one time from a fire ant nest and released it in our forest behind our house. And ever since that day, we had a family of barred owls that would always have babies up in our live oak trees. So all kinds of things interact with this tree. It's a favorite for hummingbirds as they're kind of making their rounds for the day. They'll stop and rest up in the live oak, maybe eat some of the pollen, things like that. So these are really, really great trees. And like I said, this is definitely the tree that you need to ensure you have the proper spacing for before you put it in the ground. But if you do have the space for a live oak, I highly, highly recommend it. And if you don't have the space for a live oak, there are other options out there, right? Other options in the Quercus family. You can go on this resource I'm about to give you here in a little bit. FFL plant is a good one. Um, if you go on Google and look up the Institute for Regional Conservation's natives for your neighborhood, you can just go on Google and look up natives for your neighborhood. It'll be the first link. You can type in Quercus there, and this list is from natives for your neighborhood, and it will kick back a list of all the oak species that are suitable for South Florida based on your zip code, which is awesome. Just make sure you're not planting an invasive version. I'm if I'm not mistaken, I believe the triangles mean they might be invasive. So just do a little research before you put those in the ground. You don't want to put in something that's going to offset our native plants and wildlife. All right, so Quercus, you can see these Quercus, like I said, they need a lot of space. You can see them kind of lining the street here, which is absolutely beautiful, I agree, but actually these trees are not really spaced properly, so they're going to have issues as they get older and older, and those roots kind of mesh together. They may have some issues, so really, really space these guys out well because they can get huge. And if you look down at the bottom of the screen, this is the champion live oak. I apologize, I forget where this is located, but you can see two people standing by the base of the tree. You can go on, I forget the website. Let me look it up. Champion trees. There's a website you can go and look up AmericanForest.org. You can search all the what's called champion trees, basically the largest known species of each species of tree here in Florida. So the champion live oak, I want to say, is located somewhere here in Florida. Beautiful trees. All right. So these are just some more recommendations, and I have some more stuff so that y'all don't go anywhere. I'm going to get to my recommended fruit trees as well for South Florida before we're done. But I encourage you guys to do your own research because, like I said, this will be a shorter presentation, and I could talk all day about tree recommendations. So here's just a few more: bald cypress, ironwood, Dahoon holly, Keys blackbead, which is a host for the Miami blue, locustberry, satin leaf, Simpson stopper, slash pine is actually probably another one of my favorite trees. Even though pines, a lot of people don't like them for whatever reason, I love them. And Florida is historically all pine land, so if you want to restore your yard to what it used to be, it probably most likely used to be a pine forest. So restoring it with native slash pine might not be a bad idea. These are some of our resources. The one that you see highlighted is our FFL Plants app, which is released by the University of Florida. You can download it on your iPhone or your Android, or you can go on the desktop and go on Google and look up FFL Plants app, and you can also access it online that way. This is a great app that lets you research Florida friendly or Florida native plants based on the zip code that you provide. So you could find plants specific to your neighborhood or to your area. And you could even set criteria such as, say you want a flowering tree a large tree, Florida native, that attracts butterflies and has a white flower and is large, right? You can set all these criteria in this app, and it'll kick back a list of plants with exactly those criteria. So, if you want a yellow flowering tree or a white flowering tree for whatever reason, aesthetics or what have you, you can set all those criteria in that app and search and get kicked back a list of Florida friendly or native plants if you don't like my recommendations. All right. So, just more tips on attracting wildlife. UF recommends you increase the vertical layering in your landscape if you're trying to provide for wildlife. That includes having a nice ground cover, maybe like a Florida sunshine mimosa, then a nice mid-story shrub layer. Let's say I want to have our Florida native firebush there, right? They produce nice berry, nice flowers that a lot of animals love. And then maybe I want a canopy tree looming up above that, something like a false tamarind, maybe something a little bit bigger, right? So increasing those layers of your landscape give animals places to hide, to set up a nest, and raise their young. So vertical layering will help increase the amount of wildlife in your area. And that's why areas like the Gables and the Grove have all these animals like birds and all those things. They like those areas because they feel protected and feel safe there. And there's a plethora of food, obviously. All right. These are some of my fruit tree recommendations for South Florida: avocado, banana, citrus. The ones with the little stars by them are ones that I know of that have major kind of pest issues. So if you're planning on putting one of these in, you can reach out to me and I can give you some recommendations on maybe cultivar or cultural practices you can do to help reduce the onset of certain diseases or pests that might invade. For instance, like citrus, we've got something called the Asian citrus psyllid. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but ways you can help offset these damaging pests and diseases on your fruit trees in South Florida is you can increase the biodiversity of your landscape. So obviously, we just talked about a whole plethora of South Florida trees, but you can do the same thing with your fruit trees in your landscape, right? And biodiversity, meaning the bio means life, diversity means the different options, right? So different options of life, different kinds of trees, plants in your landscape. Actually, scientists have found out that biodiversity is scientifically linked to human health. So, the most biodiverse areas in the world are old growth forests, like rainforests and things like that. And that's where a majority of our of our medicines and things like that are synthesized from old growth forests. So, and old growth forests are the most biodiverse regions on our earth. All right, so this is a nasty little disease which affects all citrus. If you've got a citrus tree at your house and you see these kind of yellowing symptoms on your leaves, it could be a nutrient deficiency, but more than likely it's a really nasty disease which is kind of throttling the Florida citrus industry, known as citrus greening. And it's the most serious disease of citrus plants worldwide, and it's caused by this little tiny, not microscopic, because you can see them with the bare eye, little tiny fly psyllid thing called the Asian citrus psyllid. As the name suggests, it is introduced from Asia, and it basically produces a bacteria in its saliva, and it'll go and bite onto your leaf to suck out some of those juices from the leaf, and when it does so, it's going to leave that bacteria behind, which is going to eventually affect your plant. And you can see the citrus is unable to really produce. It still will produce fruit, but the fruit's going to be riddled with, you can see it doesn't really ever turn the right color. It's going to always have a little bit of that greening on it. And the inside of the fruit's going to be pretty much ridden of juice. It's going to be very dry and stony almost on the inside. So if you're experiencing these problems in your citrus, you most likely have this disease. And I regret to inform you there's really nothing you can do to undo the disease, except maybe prevent it from spreading to your other trees by removing and burning the infected trees. I've actually been to homeowners' houses and seen these little psyllids on the leaves currently. So if you have one, you see those issues, go out there and scout for that little guy, and I guarantee you'll probably find him on one of your leaves. And we have recommendations at the University of Florida for replacements or how to prevent this. Really, there's not much we can do outside of putting it in a grow bag or in a greenhouse, something like that. But there are options. All right. And the other major one I wanted to highlight today was something that's is recently introduced to Miami-Dade County, the lychee mite. This thing is microscopic. You cannot see this with your blind eye. And actually, I can't even see it with my 2,000 time microscope. The only way we can visualize this mite is actually with an electron scanning microscope. You can see the image of them over here, these little creepy crawly looking things on the right side. And this mite will get into your lychee trees. And at first, the symptoms appear like a blistering on the leaves. The image A isn't really a great depictor of it. Uh, B and C is more closely what your leaves will begin to look like. The new growth is going to begin to crinkle up. And on the underside of the leaf, which you see on the right side, you start to see these galls forming, basically these hairy spots, hairy patches on the bottom of your leaves. And basically, it's not going to kill the tree. The fruit is still edible, unlike the citrus greening. So maybe not as destructive as a disease as the citrus greening, but it is commercially destructive because the fruit becomes less attractive. Sometimes you can get those gally growths on it as well. The fruit just turns a little more brown and unsightly. So if you're, this kind of got introduced into Miami at a time when lychee production was trying to get ramped up to go global, right? Or at least, start producing fruit for trade and sale, commercial use, right? But unfortunately, the lychee mite is kind of putting a wrench in those plans. So if you have these issues, go ahead and contact us and we can provide recommendations on how to cull the lychee mites. Unfortunately, like the citrus greening, right now, our recommendations aren't going to rid your plant of the disease, but it will make it viable to still produce fruit and maybe not look so visually unattractive because eventually, basically every leaf on that tree is going to be covered in that nasty looking gall. All right. So this basically comes to the end of my talk today. This will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. But I just want to kind of leave you guys with this message since it is Earth Month. Always use your resources, right? Here at UF IFAS, we offer free outreach, which is obviously what you're attending today. But we also offer free recommendations on how to, assess less of an impact on your environment. The slide in the beginning where I mentioned Florida friendly landscaping, we're here to help, right? And it's a free resource. So I always say, know how to act before you act, right? The example I like to give is my specialty is really in turf grass disease, and especially as we're going to gearing up to get into our rainy season, I see a lot of landscapers telling their clients that they have chinch bugs in their yards when they start to see their yards declining a little bit. So the homeowner will go out and purchase insecticide to kill the chinch bugs, and they'll be dumping it on their landscape to try and get rid of them. And then eventually their grass starts to look even worse because they're dumping this chemical on it. So they bring me a sample. But at that point, they'll bring me a sample and ask, what can I do to save my grass? My guy tells me I have chinch bugs. I've been applying this insecticide. It's not doing anything. And I'll do my little disease assay here on our microscope. And 9 times out of 10, it's always like a fungal issue caused by overwatering or just because we get so much rain during our rainy season. And these people have been told they have chinch bugs, so they go out and purchase this expensive insecticide, which can degrade our environment. And then they're dumping it on their landscape, and their landscape's only getting worse. And they've only wasted money and they've wasted time and degraded our environment, right? When all along they could have brought me the sample and I could have told them right off rip what the issue was, or at least pointed them to someone who can tell them the issue. It might not be free, but like I said, we don't have all the tools in our lab. It's really kind of rudimentary, but things like fungal issues, which is usually the source of the problem as far as turf is concerned, we can usually tell those issues. So we have all kinds of free services. And another thing I want to highlight to you guys is our Ask EDIS powered by IFAS search engine. I'll put it in the chat for you guys. It's going to be edis.ifas.ufl.edu. You can basically think of that as Google. I just posted that in the chat for you guys, the link if you're interested. It's like a scholarly research article Google is how I consider it. So say you've got an edible garden or maybe even a tree in your landscape and it's got like a leaf spot, or maybe you think it has some kind of disease developing, or say you've got tomatoes and your tomatoes are they're rotting off at the end and before the fruit produces. You want to know what the issue is. Well, before you go purchase fertilizers and things that can degrade our environment, you can either contact us, which is what I would recommend, or if you want to do a little research yourself, go on this edis.ifas.ufl.edu website, and you can type in the search bar what your issue is. Say you have a spot on your pepper plant, type in pepper plants, and it'll kick you back a list of scholarly reviewed articles for known issues, diseases, and pests that can affect a pepper plant, and you can kind of compare and contrast to what you're seeing on the symptoms of your plants. Or, if you don't feel like doing that hard work, send it on our way and we'll help do it for free. That's what we're here for. So always use your resources that are available to you, and these are all free resources. Um, if you have a sample you'd like to send in, you can send it to my attention or just send it into our office at the 18710 Southwest 288th Street. You can just look up the UF ICUS extension Miami-Dade County on Google and it'll give you our website. You can send me photos to my email or you can give me a call. That's my direct line from my office there at the bottom. And this will all be uploaded to YouTube. So no worries if you're falling a little behind. You can also stay connected on our social. Things like this class and other opportunities get posted to our social media all the time. I encourage you guys to check out our YouTube channel as well because all of these In Your Backyard series webinars are being recorded and uploaded there, as well as a library full of older videos that you guys might find useful or interesting. All kinds of great peer-reviewed, research-backed information provided in all these videos. So get out there and learn. It's Earth Month. I love that you guys are getting involved. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. So thank you guys for sitting with me for 50 minutes. I got a little bit longer than I expected. I kind of got up from my soapbox there a few times, but thank you all for listening. And if you guys have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer.